In a small village in the south of England, at the end of the 19th century, a young woman named Lucy Hartwell faces a destiny she did not choose: to marry a wealthy and cruel man in order to save her family from ruin. But in an act of desperate courage, she accepts the unexpected proposal of Stephen Carver, a silent carpenter whom everyone despises. What no one knows is that this man with calloused hands guards a secret capable of changing the fate of them both forever. The main characters are Lucy Hartwell, 22 years old, daughter of a landowner fallen on hard times, beautiful and proud, with a dignity that neither debts nor hunger have been able to break. Stephen Carver, 30 years old, carpenter, a man of few words and deep eyes who carries a past that no one knows. And Lord Aubrey Merritt, the wealthiest and most feared man in Ashford, whose ambition knows neither limits nor scruples. The story takes place in Ashford, a village of wheat fields and olive groves in the south of England, in the year 1887. If you enjoy intense and redemptive love stories, subscribe to our channel. We publish new stories every week. Leave a like if this story touches your heart, and tell us in the comments where you are joining us from today. Ashford was a village that smelled of freshly baked bread in the mornings and damp earth when the autumn rains arrived. Its whitewashed houses clustered around a stone square where a centuries-old fig tree grew, and from the hills surrounding it, one could see the wheat fields stretching out like a golden cloth as far as the eye could reach. It was a place where everyone knew one another, where secrets lasted little and judgments formed quickly, sometimes far too quickly. Lucy Hartwell had been born in that village as wildflowers are born, without asking permission and without quite knowing why. She was the eldest daughter of Lord Roger Hartwell, a man who had inherited a modest estate and good manners, but who had inherited neither luck nor a head for business. 3 consecutive poor harvests, a badly managed loan, and debts that grew like weeds had been eating away at the edges of what had once been a respectable life. The estate was still standing, but the roof of the main house leaked, the labourers were half what they had been, and meat no longer appeared on the table every day. At 22, Lucy was the most beautiful thing in Ashford, though she did not know it, or pretended not to. She had dark hair always gathered in a thick plait that fell down her back, eyes the colour of chestnuts in autumn, and a way of walking that was not vanity, but conviction, as though every step she took was taken with purpose. She read, something few in the village did, and had a quick tongue that sometimes got her into trouble with her mother. But beneath that firmness, there was also a tenderness she kept well guarded, that she did not give away easily, that waited for the right moment and the right person to emerge. Her mother, Lady Catherine, was a woman who had been beautiful in her youth and who retained the bearing of one who knows what she was. She carried her sorrows with dignity, but with rigidity, as though admitting suffering aloud were a form of defeat. She wanted for Lucy what she herself had never had: security, a house without leaks, a husband of standing. She was not a bad woman. She was simply a woman who had learned that love without money ages badly. Lord Roger, on the other hand, was one of those men one both loves and pities at once. He had a generous heart and a weak will. He loved his daughter sincerely, but he also had the fear of weak men before the world, and that fear had led him to make decisions that now kept him awake at night. Also living in that house were Lucy's 2 younger sisters, Agnes and Rose, aged 16 and 14 respectively, who did not yet fully understand what was happening, but who sensed in the air the tension that precedes great changes. It was in the first days of May of 1887 when Lord Roger called Lucy to his study. The study was a small room that smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco, with a window looking out onto the yard where 3 hens pecked about. There was a dark wooden desk and 2 chairs. Roger was seated behind the desk when Lucy entered, and she knew by his posture that the conversation to come was not going to be easy. "Sit down, my dear," he said. Lucy sat. She waited. "You know how things stand," Roger began without meeting her eyes. "The debts to the moneylender can wait no longer. I have spoken with him. He gives us until the end of summer." "End of summer?" repeated Lucy in a low voice. "Lord Aubrey Merritt has inquired after you," said Roger, and then he did look at her. "He has spoken with me in all formality. He wishes to ask for your hand in marriage. He has offered to settle the estate's debts and, moreover, a generous dowry for your sisters." The silence that followed was the kind that weighs. Lucy felt something cold move inside her chest, like water rising up a dark well. "Lord Aubrey," she said, and her voice did not tremble, though everything else inside her did, "is 48 years old and has already buried 2 wives. "The first died of fever," said Roger, almost in a whisper. "And the second fell down the stairs," Lucy finished. "And no one in this village forgot the bruises she had when they laid her out." Roger lowered his head. He did not answer. "Father," said Lucy, with a composure that cost her to maintain, "are you asking me to marry that man?" "I am telling you that the family needs you to consider it," he replied. Lucy rose. She did not knock the chair over, nor slam the door. She left the room with the same composure with which she had entered, carrying the weight of what she had just heard, as though it were stones inside her dress. Lady Catherine was waiting for her in the corridor. She had heard everything. "Don't do anything foolish, Lucy," said her mother, in that voice of hers that mixed harshness with something that might have been pleading. "I won't," replied Lucy, and continued walking towards her room. That night, she did not sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling of her room, listening to the wind move the shutters, thinking of Lord Aubrey Merritt's face the last time she had seen him at the market. He had a way of looking at women as though they were merchandise in a shop window. He had fat hands and fingers full of rings, and he smiled in a way that never reached his eyes. He was a man who had bought everything he had ever wanted in his life, and who now wanted to buy her. Lucy closed her eyes and thought about what awaited her if she said yes. A large, cold house. A man who did not want her, but wanted to possess her. Years of silence, of fear, of pretending. And she thought too of what awaited her family if she said no. The moneylender, the debt, the estate sold. Her sisters without, dowries. Her father, a man already breaking inside, finishing the breaking on the outside. There was no way out, or so she believed that night. The following morning dawned with low mist over the fields. Lucy rose before anyone else, pinned up her hair, put her apron over her dark dress, and went out to the yard to collect the hen's eggs. It was a task she had done since childhood, and which calmed her. That simple contact with the world of concrete things, the warmth of an egg between her palms, the half-hearted clucking of the birds. It was at that moment that she first saw Stephen Carver, or rather, it was the first time she truly saw him. Stephen was working on the neighbouring land of Mr. Prosper Tilley, mending the fence of the yard that bordered the Hartwell estate. She had seen him before in passing, the way one sees labourers, without pausing on his face. But that morning she saw him. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with the hands of someone who had worked with wood. Since always, large, tanned, marked. He wore a collarless linen shirt, rolled up to the elbows, and a pair of cord trousers that had been washed so many times they had lost nearly all their colour. He worked in silence, neither hurrying nor pausing, driving posts with an efficiency that had nothing spectacular about it, but that had something deeply sure. When he felt he was being watched, he raised his head. His eyes were dark, with a stillness like moonless nights. He looked at Lucy without smiling, without lowering his gaze, without the civility that humble workers sometimes employed before someone of standing. He looked at her directly, as one looks at a person. Then he returned to his work. Lucy carried on with the eggs, but during breakfast she could not get that look out of her head. The days that followed were days of tension in the Hartwell household. Lord Aubrey had sent a gift, a basket with wine, cured meats, and an embroidered handkerchief for Lucy. Lady Catherine received it with a smile that was in reality relief. Lord Roger received it with guilt, disguised as gratitude. Lucy received it with a coldness that did not go unnoticed by anyone. In the square, The village was already murmuring. Ashford was the kind of place where people learn of everything before it happens, and where opinions form at the speed of gunpowder. Hope Fenton, the neighbour from across the road, who was the village's main channel of information, had already spread the word that Lord Aubrey Merritt was going to ask for Lucy Hartwell's hand. "What luck," Hope was saying at the market, with that mixture of admiration and envy people have before another's fortune. "Lucy is going to be Lady Merritt. Who would have thought?" "Let's hope she lasts longer than the other two," someone replied from behind a vegetable stall, and the women laughed with that uneasy laughter of those who know there is a truth that ought not to be spoken aloud. Lucy passed through the market that morning and heard the comments. She said nothing. She bought what she had come to buy and returned home with her head high and her stomach tight. It was the following day, a Thursday mid-morning, when Stephen Carver knocked at the door of the Hartwell house. Lord Roger opened it himself, which was unusual. He saw the carpenter on the threshold, hat in hands, and looked at him with the mixture of surprise and condescension with which men of middling standing regard working men. "What can I do for you?" he asked. "I would like to speak with you," said Stephen. "About your daughter." Lord Roger looked at him for a moment that seemed very long. "Come in," he said at last, for good breeding and curiosity outweighed pride. Lucy was not in the parlour when Stephen entered. She was in the kitchen, but she heard voices, and something in the tone of those voices stopped her. She moved to the kitchen doorway and listened without making a sound. She did not hear everything. She heard fragments. Stephen's deep, measured voice, her father's confused voice, scattered words, marriage, proposal, care, honour. And then her father's voice, louder. "Are you joking?" And Stephen's voice, equally measured. "I am not in the habit of joking about such things." Lucy came out of the kitchen. Both men looked at her. Roger had on his face an expression of absolute bewilderment. Stephen looked at her in the same way he had looked at her in the yard, directly, without adornment. "Can someone explain to me what is happening here?" asked Lucy. This man," said Roger, gesturing vaguely at Stephen, "says he wishes to ask for your hand in marriage." Lucy looked at Stephen. "Why?" she asked directly. Stephen was not unsettled by the direct question. "Because you need a way out," he said, "and I need a wife." "Why me?" "Because I have watched you these past days, and I know what awaits you if there is no other option. And because I believe you deserve something better than what they are about to offer you." Roger made a gesture of protest. "This is an insult," he said. "You are a carpenter, a labourer. My daughter—" "Father," said Lucy, with a calmness that surprised them both, "let us speak for a moment alone." Roger looked at her. He wished to say something more. But there was something in his daughter's voice that stopped him. He left the room, not without first throwing Stephen a look, charged with all the pride of a man who feels humiliated. Lucy and Stephen were left alone. She crossed her arms and looked at him. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. "A marriage," replied Stephen. "An honest one. I offer you my name, my roof, and my work. I do not promise you wealth, for I have none. I promise you that no one will harm you under my roof." Lucy studied him for a moment. He was not handsome in an obvious way, but he had a face that made you want to keep looking. A firm jaw, a straight nose, something in the expression that was integrity without arrogance. "Why does it matter to you what happens to me?" she asked. "You do not know me." "I do not," he admitted. "But I have seen enough to know you do not deserve what is being prepared for you." "And what do you know of what is being prepared for me?" "In this village, one knows everything," he said. And there was something in his voice that might have been ironic were it not so serious. "Lord Aubrey Merritt has spent 2 weeks speaking of you as though you were already his." Lucy pressed her lips. "Together." "And what do you gain from this?" Stephen took a moment to reply. "A wife," he said at last. "And that is all I shall say for now." Lucy looked at him for a time that seemed long to them both. She thought of Lord Aubrey. She thought of her sisters. She thought of the leaking roof and her father with his head bowed, and she thought of something she could not have fully explained, the way this man looked at her, without wanting to possess her, without wanting to diminish her, as though she were a complete person who deserved to be seen whole. "I need time," she said. "You have until tomorrow afternoon," replied Stephen. "Lord Aubrey comes to speak with your father on Friday." And with that, he picked up his hat and left. That night, the second sleepless night, Lucy made her decision. It was not easy. It was not a decision that came like a revelation or a flash of light. It came slowly, the way dawn comes. First a soft grey, then a timid orange, then the full certainty that the night had ended. She thought of everything she might lose and everything she might gain. She thought of fear and of dignity and of her sisters. And in the end, she thought of Stephen Carver's face, of that look that asked for nothing, that simply saw. The following morning before breakfast, she went to the yard and looked for him. He was working again at the neighbour's fence. When he saw her approaching, he put down his hammer and waited. "Very well," she said. Stephen looked at her for a moment. "Are you certain?" "No," replied Lucy. "But yes." He nodded, and that was all. The family's reaction was what Lucy had expected, but that did not make it any less hard. Her mother did not cry, which would have been easier. Lady Catherine went very still and very pale, and then said in a voice that was almost a thread, "Then you have lost everything." "I have gained everything that matters," replied Lucy, though in that moment she was not entirely sure she believed it. Her father did not leave his study all day. When he finally emerged that evening, his eyes were red from weeping where no one could see. He told Lucy she was stubborn, that she was ruining the family's future, that she was dishonoring him. And then he embraced her, clumsily, and she felt that he too was frightened. Agnes and Rose did not fully understand what was happening, but they followed their mother in silence and disapproval, because at that age one follows the nearest adult, even if one does not quite know why. The news spread through Ashford, as all news spreads in small villages, quickly with embellishments distorted along the way. By the time it reached Lord Aubrey Merritt's ears, it had acquired some details it did not originally have. It was said that Lucy had rejected Aubrey to his face. It was said she had chosen the carpenter out of spite. It was said she was mad. Lord Aubrey heard the news seated in his study, which was large and dark, and smelled of leather and money. He had a glass of brandy in his hands, which he gripped with more force than necessary when they told him what had happened. He said nothing for some time. Then he said, in a low voice, "We shall see." It was the kind of phrase that in Lord Aubrey Merritt's mouth was not simply an expression, it was a promise. In the square, the reaction of the people was the kind that hurts even when one has already anticipated it. Hope Fenton was the first to comment publicly. "What madness," she said, with that expression, "people make when they want to appear compassionate, but are in reality enjoying themselves." Leaving Lord Aubrey with all he has to go off with a carpenter, who on top of everything has nothing but his trade and a little house that's a sorry sight. "Perhaps she's in love," said someone in a mocking tone. "In love?" replied Hope. "You can't pay debts with love, dear." And everyone laughed. And those who did not laugh remained silent, which is sometimes worse. The wedding was held 3 weeks later in the small church of Ashford, on a morning in early June that had that dry heat of the south that clings to the skin from the first hour. There was no banquet. There were no flowers brought from afar. There was a simple mass with the village vicar, a bunch of wildflowers that Lucy had gathered herself from the fields before dawn, and her mother's dress altered to her size, white with a lace collar that was already slightly yellowing. Of Lucy's family, her father attended, because he could not go, and who throughout the ceremony wore the expression of a man waiting for it to start raining, and her 2 younger sisters, who went because Lord Roger ordered it, and who spent the Mass glancing at each other in silence. Lady Catherine said she had a headache and stayed at home. Lucy knew it was not the headache, and she let it pass. On Stephen's side there was no family. Or at least that was what he said. No relatives, no close friends. Only Matthew, a 15-year-old boy who worked from time to time in Stephen's workshop and who looked up to him with the clumsy and sincere admiration of the young for men who seemed great to them. Outside the church, in the square, there were people. Not many, but enough to be noticeable. Some had come out of curiosity, others out of habit, others so as not to stay at home wondering what they were missing. And there were comments. They both heard them. "Look at her," said a woman's voice that did not bother to lower itself too much. "So serious, as though she were at a funeral." "Perhaps she is," replied another voice, and there was laughter. "With what she could have been," the first voice continued, "and she ends up marrying a carpenter who smells of sawdust." Stephen did not look towards where the voices were coming from. Lucy did look, briefly, and her eyes met those of Hope Fenton, who held her gaze without shame and with a smile of condescension. Lucy did not return the smile, nor look away. She simply kept walking. When they emerged from the church as husband and wife, Stephen offered her his arm. She took it, and they walked together through the square of Ashford under the June sun, with the village's eyes upon them, in that shared silence that was still strange between the two of them, but that already had something firm about it. Stephen's house was at the southern end of the village, at the end of an unnamed lane that the locals called the Olive Lane, because at the far end there were 3 old olive trees that no longer gave oil but gave shade. It was a small house, whitewashed walls, 2 rooms, a kitchen, a tiny yard, and a workshop attached to the side where Stephen worked the wood. The windows were narrow but caught good light in the mornings, and the floor was of fired clay that creaked in some spots. Lucy entered that house for the first time on the afternoon of her wedding. Stephen let her go in first. She walked slowly through the rooms, touching the walls, looking at the furniture, which was sparse and plain but made with a care that was evident even in the dimness. The kitchen table had perfectly turned corners. The chairs had smooth, well-fitted backs. The chest in the entrance was made of a dark, lustrous wood that had been polished with patience. "You made them," said Lucy, looking at the table. "Yes," replied Stephen. "They are good. They are sufficient." That evening they ate together for the first time, a lentil stew that Lucy prepared, with what she found in the larder, rye bread, and a jug of water. They ate in almost complete silence, that uncomfortable but not hostile silence of 2 strangers sharing a space, not yet knowing how much space to give the other. Stephen ate without complaining or praising. Lucy ate without asking whether he had enjoyed it. When they finished, Stephen cleared the plates. That Lucy did notice, that he cleared the plates without anyone asking him to, that he went to the kitchen and set them to a washing with the same naturalness with which he had driven posts that morning. "You do not need to do that," she said. "I live here too," he replied, without turning round. And Lucy said nothing more. The first week was like that, silent, careful, full of the kind of attention one pays when one does not wish to intrude or be intruded upon. They slept in the same room because there was no other, in the same bed that Stephen had widened with wooden planks before the wedding, and between them there was an invisible but concrete space that neither crossed, which was a form of respect. Stephen rose before dawn, lit the kitchen hearth, and left the water heated before going to the workshop. Lucy rose half an hour later, and that cauldron of hot water waiting for her each morning was the first thing of his that she began to understand. He did not say much. When he did, it was to say something worth saying. He asked no unnecessary questions. He did not ask how she was, because he could see how she was. He did not ask whether she missed her home, because it was obvious that she did. He did not ask whether she had regrets, because that was a question that had no answer yet. Lucy, for her part, put the house in order with the quiet efficiency of someone who needs to have something under control. She cleaned the corners that needed cleaning, reorganized the larder, mended the bedroom curtain that had come unstitched. She learned the rhythm of Stephen's house as one learns the rhythm of new music, at first stumbling, then finding the beat. The second week, something began to change. so slowly that neither of them could have pointed to the exact moment when it changed. It was partly due to the small gestures that accumulate without one counting them. The hot water every morning, the flowers that Lucy put in a clay jug on the kitchen table, wildflowers she gathered on her walks around the area, which Stephen looked at without comment, but which he did look at. The chair. He mended one Wednesday afternoon without being asked, the one with the wobbly leg that Lucy had avoided from the start. The fruit she left on the workshop bench one morning when he was working, and which he found when he went in to look for a tool. "May I come in?" asked Lucy on the Tuesday of the second week, peering into the workshop. Stephen looked up. "It is your house," he said. Lucy entered. It smelled of freshly cut wood, of varnish, and of something sweet she could not identify. On the central bench was a piece of wood, taking the shape of something, though she did not yet know what. "What will it be?" she asked, pointing to the piece. "A cradle," replied Stephen. "For whom?" "It was ordered by a family, the Herrers in Well Street. They are going to have a child." Lucy looked at the wood for a moment. There was something in the way Stephen had carved it, with a softness and care that was not for the customer, but for what he gave to that piece of wood. "Do you like your work?" she asked. Stephen took a moment to reply, as though the question had surprised him. "Yes," he said at last. "I always knew what was in the wood before cutting it." Lucy looked at him. "What do you mean?" "That the wood already has the shape. One only has to find it." Lucy spent a while in the workshop, without saying more, watching Stephen work, and when she left, she could not explain to herself why she felt slightly different from when she had gone in. The village did not forget or forgive. Quickly, of course. In Ashford, memory was long, and judgments were hard. When Lucy went to the market, she felt the looks. Some were of pity, which sometimes hurts more than contempt because it carries an implicit condemnation. Others were of curiosity, the morbid curiosity people have for what they do not understand, and others were plainly mocking. Hope Fenton continued to be the thermometer of popular feeling. One day, at the dried goods stall, she said in a loud voice directed at no one in particular, but calculated, so that Lucy would hear, "The poor thing has traded a palace for a hovel, and so calm about it, as though it were a sensible decision." Lucy was picking over chickpeas at that moment. She did not stop, did not raise her eyes, did not change the rhythm of her hands. "The chickpeas are good today," she said to the vendor, paid what she owed, and left. But back home, sitting in the kitchen with the basket on her knees, she stayed a while without doing anything. She did not cry, because Lucy did not cry easily. But she felt the weight of everything she had left behind, and everything she still did not know whether she would find ahead. Stephen came in after a while from the workshop. He washed his hands in the basin, dried them with the cloth hanging from the nail, and then he saw her. He saw her truly, the way she was sitting with the basket without moving, eyes fixed on nothing. He sat on the chair opposite, he said nothing. He was simply there, and that being there, that silence that was not indifference but presence, was more than any words could have been. Lucy looked up after a moment. "How do you do it?" she asked. "Do what?" "Not let what people say matter to you." Stephen looked at her for a moment. "It matters," he said, "but I do not let it change what I do." Lucy looked at him. "And what do you do?" "What needs doing?" It was a simple answer, almost unsatisfying. But it had the weight of something that came from within, from a place where words are few because things are clear. "How did you learn?" she asked. Stephen looked at an indefinite point between them for a moment. "Life teaches," he said at last. "Sometimes gently, other times not so gently." And there the conversation remained, suspended between them like the smell of wood he always brought from the workshop. It was towards the end of June, nearly a month after the wedding, that Lord Aubrey Merritt made his first appearance. He made it visible in a deliberate manner, as everything Aubrey did, without discretion, With the certainty of one who does not need to hide because power does not hide, he sent one of his employees to commission a carpentry job from Stephen, a minor job, repairing a barn door. The commission in itself was insignificant. The message was not. Stephen accepted the work without comment. What happened when he went to carry it out was another matter. He went on a Monday at first light. Lucy knew when Stephen returned at midday with a different silence, denser than usual. He said nothing at first. He ate. Then, when they were clearing up, he said, "Lord Aubrey was at the estate." Lucy stopped moving. And he told me that if I ever had any inconvenience with the marriage, I could count on him, that he could make things more comfortable for the two of us. Stephen's tone was flat, informative, but Lucy knew him well enough now to know that beneath that flatness was something he controlled with effort. "What did you reply?" "That I was grateful for his interest," said Stephen, "and that the barn door would be ready in 3 days." Lucy looked at him. "That is all?" "That is all." But it was not all. Lucy knew it, and Stephen did too. Lord Aubrey Merritt was the kind of man who, when he wanted something, did not abandon the enterprise, but simply changed the method. He had built his fortune that way, with calculated patience, with a persistence that some mistook for that of good men. But the patience of good men is born of respect. Aubrey's was born of power, and the certainty that everything has a price. In the following weeks, the harassment took different forms. One day, a rumor reached the village that Stephen had had trouble with materials purchased from Merritt's warehouse, that a consignment of wood had proved defective, and the trader refused to take responsibility. Stephen lost the money from that commission. He said nothing in public. He worked harder to compensate. Another day, 2 of Stephen's most regular customers, the blacksmith and the innkeeper, cancelled their orders without giving any explanation. Both were men who owed favours to Merritt, small favours that were now being called in this way. Stephen understood. He carried on. Lucy watched all of this, and what she watched changed her from the inside out, though she could not have put it into words precisely. She watched a man who worked without complaining, who asked for no recognition, who, when things became difficult, did not look for someone to blame, but for what to do, who slept no less for it, who lost no appetite, who did not turn bitter. It was as though he had a centre of gravity very low, very firm, which storms moved but did not topple. One night in July, with the heat pressing against the walls and the windows thrown wide open, Lucy could not sleep. She got up and went to the kitchen to drink some water. The moon came through the window and turned the kitchen to silver and shadows. When she turned to go back to the room, Stephen was in the doorway. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "No," she replied. "Nor I." They both sat at the kitchen table in the moonlight with a jug of water between them. And they talked. It was not a conversation Lucy had planned. It was one of those that happen because darkness and heat and the silence of the night make it easier to say things that in the daytime would cost more. "Are you afraid of Aubrey?" she asked. "No," said Stephen. "How can you not be? He is a man who can do us a great deal of harm." "He can," Stephen admitted, "but fear would not prevent it." Lucy looked at him. There was something in him she wanted to understand, and that still eluded her. "Who are you, Stephen?" she asked, and the question came out more directly than she had intended. He looked at her for a moment. "A carpenter," he said. "That is what you do," she replied. "Not what you are." A silence. "That is a difficult question," he said at last. "I know." Stephen looked at the water jug for a moment. "I am someone who learned that things worth having come at a cost," he said at last, "and that what one builds with one's hands lasts longer than what one buys with money." Lucy waited to see if he would say more. He did not. "Where do you come from?" she asked. "No one in the village knows anything of your family." "I come from far away," said Stephen. "And is that all you are going to tell me?" He looked at her. In his eyes there was something that was not evasion, but consideration, as though he were weighing something. "For now, yes," he said. It was an answer that had far more questions inside it than answers. But Lucy did not press him. She knew him well enough by now to know that pushing him served no purpose, that he had his own timing, and that respecting it was the only way to draw closer to him. They went back to sleep without saying more. But in the darkness of that room, Lucy lay awake for a long time thinking about the way he had said, "for now," and about what those two words might contain. Thank you very much for staying with us this far. If you are still with us, comment the word heart so we know you have reached this point in the story. The summer advanced with its thick heat and its short nights. In Ashford, the days were long and people kept busy with the harvests, which that year promised to be better than before. The square filled with life in the evenings, when the sun lowered and one could breathe, and in Ferdinand's tavern there was talk of politics, grain prices, and rumours arriving from the capital. Nobody spoke of Lucy and Stephen directly anymore. The matter had lost the edge of novelty and had become integrated into the village's landscape, as things integrate that one does not understand, but cannot ignore either, with a dull discomfort, with occasional glances, with the kind of silence that has many things inside it. Lucy had begun to know Ashford in a different way from how she had always known it. Before, she knew it. From above, from the position of a landowner's daughter, with the unconscious distance that comes from needing nothing from anyone. Now she knew it from street level, from concrete, everyday need. She knew the baker who gave her credit when the week had been lean. She knew the woman who sold vegetables and always gave her the best tomato because she said she had a kind face. She knew the blacksmith who had cancelled Stephen's commission, but who, when he saw her pass, greeted her with an awkwardness that was in reality shame. Stephen had more and more work. Despite Merritt's pressures, or perhaps precisely because of them, the people who owed the landowner nothing were beginning to seek out the carpenter. He was good at his trade. Everyone knew it. And in a village of working people, the trade counts for more than the surname in the long run. One afternoon in August, Lucy went to bring lunch to the workshop. Stephen had an urgent order, the repair of a cart for a farmer who needed it before the harvest, and had not left the workshop all day. When Lucy entered, he was bent over a plank of wood, his back wet with sweat through his shirt. She put the basket on the bench, and he straightened up, wiped his forehead with his forearm, and looked at her. "Thank you," he said. "Think nothing of it," she replied. But she did not leave. She stayed looking at the workshop, which was chaotic at first glance, but which had in reality an order of its own, the order of someone who knows exactly where everything is, even if it does not appear so. "May I ask you something?" she said. "You already are." Lucy smiled. It was the first time in a long while that she had smiled truly, and it surprised her to feel it. "How long have you been in Ashford?" 3 years, he replied. "And before that, where were you?" "In various places." "Did you learn your trade from your father?" There was a pause. "No," said Stephen. "From whom then?" "From an old man in Bristol, a master. Carpenter, who has since died. He taught me everything I know." "And your family?" Stephen lowered his gaze towards the plank. "My mother died when I was 10, he said. "My father." He stopped. "I had no father, in the sense that matters." Lucy looked at him. There was something in that pause, in that suspension point before "I had no father," that was different from an ordinary silence. "What do you mean by that?" she asked. Stephen looked at her. "It means there was a man who fathered me and who did not raise me," he said, with a dryness that was not harshness, but precision. "And that for a long time I was angry about that. And then I stopped being angry because anger is no use for making furniture." It was the most he had spoken of himself since they were married. Lucy stored it carefully, without adding anything, without asking more for that day. Stephen picked up the basket, took out the bread and cheese she had brought, and ate standing beside the workbench. Lucy sat on a low stool that was in the corner and was quiet a while as he ate. When he finished, Stephen said, "Why do you stay? Did you want me to leave?" "No," he said. "But you don't have to stay." Lucy looked at him. "I like being here," she said, and it was the first time she said something like that with that simplicity, without analyzing whether it was true, letting it out as it came. Stephen looked at her for a moment. Something in his face changed slightly, something that was not exactly a smile, but was the closest thing to it he had given in a long time. "Good," he said, and returned to work. It was the day that Lucy understood she was beginning to love him. Not in a dramatic way, not with a racing heart and shortened breath. In a way more like water that slowly filters into the earth, without noise, without hurrying, finding its way. Towards the end of August came the first real warning sign. A village boy, a lad of 12 called Thomas, son of a washerwoman, came running to the workshop one afternoon with a message. Someone had said that Lord Aubrey's men had been at the Hartwell estate, that they had spoken with Lord Roger, that they had left papers. Stephen listened to the message without moving. He gave the boy a coin and told him, "Thank you." When Thomas had gone, he looked at Lucy, who had been in the workshop when the message arrived. "Go to your father," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she replied, "I am coming with you." They walked together to the Hartwell estate, which was a 20-minute walk along the mill road. It was the first time Lucy had returned since the wedding. She had exchanged a few words with her father at the market, dry, brief words full of everything unsaid. She had not spoken with her mother. The door of the house was open. Lord Roger was on the porch, sitting on a chair with a paper in his hands. When he saw them arriving, he rose with the awkwardness of a man older than his years. "Lucy," he said, "Father, what has happened?" Roger looked at Stephen with an expression difficult to read, not exactly hostility, but not welcome either. "Merritt sent his men," he said. "He says he has documents that prove part of the estate's lands belong to him on account of an old debt, a debt I did not know existed." Stephen took the paper. He read it slowly. "Is it true?" he asked at last. Roger lowered his head. "There may be something," he said. "My father, many years ago. There was a loan, but I never thought that—" "Do you have a solicitor?" asked Stephen. "There is Mr. Fulton Pryor here in Ashford." "Tomorrow go and see him," said Stephen, "with this paper. Have him examine the documents. Do not sign anything without consulting him." Roger looked at him with an expression that mixed injured pride with the relief of having someone who thought clearly. "Why does it matter to you what happens to me?" he asked, with a bluntness that was in reality a deeper question. Stephen looked at him. "Because your daughter matters to me," he said simply. Roger did not reply, but something in his face changed. Lady Catherine appeared in the doorway at that moment. She looked at Lucy. She looked at Stephen. She said nothing, but Lucy saw in her mother's eyes something she had not seen before. A small crack in that rigidity of hers, something that might have been shame or might have been acknowledgement. Lucy and Stephen left before nightfall. They walked back in silence for a while. Then Lucy said, "Thank you. There is no need." "There is need," she said. "You could have said it was none of your business." "It is my business," said Stephen. Lucy looked at him. "Why?" "Because what happens to your family happens to you, and what happens to you happens to me." It was the most direct declaration he had made since they were married. Lucy walked in silence for a moment, taking it in. "Since when?" she asked at last in a low voice. Stephen took a while to reply. "From the beginning," he said. "The stars were beginning to appear above the wheat fields when they reached the olive lane." The door of their house creaked as it opened, as always, and the familiar smell of the workshop came softly from the side. Lucy lit the oil lamp in the kitchen, and the orange light filled the small space. That night, for the first time since the wedding, before each went to their side of the bed, Lucy put her hand on Stephen's forearm. Just for a moment. And he put his over it for that same moment. And then they both looked ahead at the white wall of the room, and the silence between them was different from all the silences before. September brought the first rains and the smell of wet earth that Lucy had loved since childhood. It also brought Violet, the washerwoman's niece who lived on the other side of the village and who one day knocked on Lucy's door with a jug of olives she had gathered from the fields. "They are from the trees on the road," said Violet, who was a woman of 40, broad and open-faced. "No one picks them. It seemed a shame to let them go to waste." "Thank you very much," said Lucy, genuinely surprised. "I have heard that your husband does good work," said Violet straightforwardly. "I need someone to repair the stable door before winter. Do you think he could manage it?" "You can speak with him," said Lucy. Violet nodded and cast a frank glance at the interior of the house, with the open curiosity of village people. "Not bad," she said. "Your husband has good hands." "He does," said Lucy. It was a small exchange, but it was the first time someone from the village had approached her, without condescension or pity, simply as person to person, and that carried a weight that was not small. The weeks that followed were weeks of intense work for them both. Stephen had more commissions than before: Violet's stable door, the repair of a cart for the mare, a table commissioned by the village doctor. Lucy helped him with the accounting tasks, keeping the register of commissions and payments in a small paper notebook she had bought at the shop in the square. She had good handwriting and a better head for figures, things Stephen acknowledged readily. "No one ever did this," he said one afternoon, looking at the orderly notebook, "before I had it all in my head." "Things get lost in the head," said Lucy. "Yes," he said, "things get lost." There was between them, in those weeks, a form of companionship that was different from the forced cohabitation of the start. It was something that had been built brick by brick, with the small gestures and the shared silences and the precise words said when necessary. It was not yet what either of them could have called love without hesitation, but it was something real and their own, something they had no name for yet, but that they recognized. It was in mid-October that Lucy found the letters. She was looking for a hammer in the workshop, a Tuesday when Stephen had gone out on a commission. She could not quite remember where she had last seen it. She checked the bench drawers, the tool cabinet, the wall shelf, and in the back drawer of the cabinet, beneath a folded cloth, she found a small wooden box, closed with a brass clasp. It was not her intention to open it. But the clasp was loose, and the box opened on its own when she picked it up, and what she saw inside did not allow her to close it without looking. They were letters, tied with a thin cord. Letters written in a hand that was not Stephen's, a more elaborate, older hand. The envelopes were yellowed and some edges were folded. The top letter had no envelope, was folded directly, and the name that appeared in the heading was Dear Stephen. Lucy looked at them for a long moment without touching them. Then she closed the box, left it in the drawer exactly as she had found it, and left the workshop. The hammer she found hanging on the back wall, where it had always been. But for the rest of the day, she could not get those letters out of her head. When Stephen returned in the afternoon, Lucy was in the kitchen preparing supper. He came in, washed his hands, sat at the table. They ate. They talked of the day's matters, the commission, the approaching weather, the price of oil at the market. And at the end, when they were clearing up, Lucy said, "I was looking for a hammer today." "The big one?" "It is on the back wall," said Stephen. "I found it," she said. A pause. "I opened the cabinet drawer by accident." Stephen stopped. It was not a pause of guilt, but of comprehension. "Did you see the letters?" he asked. "I saw there were letters," said Lucy. "I did not read them." Stephen looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded slightly. "Thank you," he said. He said no more that night. and Lucy did not ask. But she knew that something had shifted between them, one step further towards that ground that neither of them fully stood on yet. It was 3 nights later that Stephen told her. He did not tell everything. He told it in pieces, slowly, in that way of his that gave each word exactly the right weight. They were sitting on the porch of the house, in 2 chairs Stephen had brought out because the night was fresh and clear and the October sky had more stars than usual. Lucy had a shawl around her shoulders. Stephen had his hands on his knees. "Those letters are from my father," he said, looking at the stars. Lucy waited. "The man who fathered me. The one I said I had not, in the farms. Sense that matters. Is he still alive? No? He died 2 years ago." A pause. "Did you know him?" "Once only," said Stephen. "I came to Ashford for that reason." Lucy looked at him. "He was here? Your father lived in Ashford?" Stephen turned to look at her. "Not far from here," he said. There was something in the way he said this that was not the end of the story, but the threshold of it. Lucy could feel it, that there was something more, something he was not yet ready to say, that needed time, or perhaps trust, or perhaps something they did not quite have yet. "Did you go to see him?" she asked. "I went," said Stephen. "It was late. He was ill. He died 3 months later." "Did you speak?" "We spoke." "About what?" Stephen took a while. "About what might have been," he said at last, "and about what was." Lucy looked at him. There was something in his face she had not seen before. Not quite sadness, not quite bitterness. Something closer to the calm that comes when one has wrestled with something very large for a very long time and has finally let it go. "Did you forgive him?" asked Lucy very softly. Stephen looked at her. "I let him go," he said, "which is not the same thing, but it is enough." The silence that followed was one of those that do not weigh, that allow breathing. The stars above the rooftops of Ashford were cold and precise. From somewhere came the distant howl of a dog. "Thank you for telling me," said Lucy. Stephen nodded. "There is more," he said, "but not yet." "Whenever you are ready," she replied, and it was enough. November arrived with cold and with the first mists of the year. The fields were already harvested, and the village was entering that quieter time that precedes winter, with doors more closed and conversations longer around the hearth. Lord Aubrey had not given up. That became clear when news began to arrive that he had been speaking with the new regional commissioner, a recently arrived official from the capital who knew no one and whom Merritt had taken pains to introduce himself to with all the strategic generosity of one who knows that today's favors are tomorrow's power. The rumor came through Violet, who had heard it at the provisions shop. "They say Merritt is looking for a way to claim land with old papers," said Violet with her characteristic directness, "and that the man from the capital is willing to listen." Lucy brought the information to Stephen that same afternoon. He listened without interrupting her. When she finished, he said, "We need to go and see the solicitor." "My father already went." "Not with your father, you and I." The following day they went together to the office of Solicitor Fulton Pryor, who was a man of 60, bald and meticulous, with a pair of spectacles that constantly slipped down his nose, and who had the habit of holding them with his index finger every time he said something important. Mr. Pryor received them with the reserved courtesy of a man who has spent a lifetime keeping other people's secrets, and who has learned that appearances say nothing of substance. Stephen set out the Hartwell's situation briefly and clearly. Mr. Pryor listened, held his spectacles, said he would review the documents, that old debts had statutes of limitation, and that they would need to see exactly what was involved. As they were about to leave, Mr. Pryor said, "One moment, if you please." They both turned. The solicitor looked at Stephen for a moment, over the rim of his spectacles. "Are you Stephen Carver?" he asked, with a precision that was not a question but a confirmation. "Yes," said Stephen. Mr. Pryor nodded slowly. "There is a pending matter," said the solicitor. that I should address with you in private, whenever you consider it appropriate." Stephen did not change expression. "When would you like me to return?" "Whenever you wish," said Mr. Pryor. "But do not delay too long. There are deadlines." They came out into the street. The November sky was that uniform grey that does not threaten rain but simply is. Lucy looked at Stephen. "What was that?" she asked. "Something that will have to wait a little," he said. "Do you already know what it is?" A pause. "I know." "And when are you going to tell me?" Stephen looked at her. And in his eyes there was something different from all the previous times he had avoided telling her something. No longer reserve, but something more like the decision of a man who is about to take a step and is checking the ground one last time. "Soon," he said. And Lucy, who knew him well enough now to understand that word in his mouth, trusted it. That night, Stephen spent a long time in the workshop after supper. Lucy heard him working from the bedroom, the measured stroke of the hammer, the sound of the plane over the wood. It was late when he came into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. Lucy was awake. He knew it from the way she breathed. "Lucy," he said. "Yes?" "When all of this is over," he began. "When you know everything there is to know about me, I want you to know that what there is between us now is real, that it did not begin with any plan for it to be this way, that it just happened." Lucy sat up slightly. "Stephen," she said, "I already know it is real. I wanted to say it anyway." "Why now?" A silence. "Because what is coming changes things on the outside," he said, "and I wanted to make sure what was on the inside had already been said." Lucy looked at him in the eyes. Darkness. She could not see his face well, but she knew him well enough by now to feel what she could not see. "What was on the inside has already been said," she said, "some time ago." And Stephen did not reply, because there were things that needed no reply. The first week of December was the week when everything moved. It began in an ordinary way. Lucy went to the market on Monday. Stephen delivered a commission on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, a man arrived at the house whom neither of them knew. He was a middle-aged man, well-dressed, with a leather briefcase and the look of someone who has traveled and who carries the signs of the journey in the dust on his shoes and the tiredness in his eyes. He asked for Stephen Carver. Lucy showed him in. When Stephen saw him, something changed in his face. It was not surprise. It was something more like the recognition of someone who had expected this, but did not know exactly when it was going to arrive. "Mr. Leonard," said Stephen. "Good morning, Stephen," said the man. "Have you spoken with Pryor yet?" "I was with him yesterday," said Mr. Leonard. "Everything is in order. The formal proceedings must be completed, but the documents are valid. The will can be executed." Lucy was standing by the kitchen doorway. She looked at Stephen. "What will?" she asked. Stephen looked at her. Then he sat in the kitchen chair, as though he needed something to lean on before speaking. He made a gesture for her to sit too. Mr. Leonard remained, standing discreetly. "The man who was my father," Stephen began, "was Sir Severin Carver. He was the owner of an estate 30 miles from Ashford, in the valley they call Oakvale." Lucy listened without interrupting. "He fathered me when he was very young, with a woman who was not his wife. He gave me his surname, which was the only thing he gave me for a long time. I grew up in another town. My mother raised me alone until she died. I lived with the master carpenter in Bristol until I came of age. I had no family other than him." A pause. Stephen looked at his hands on the table. "When Severin Carver knew he was dying, he had me sent for. He recognized me the moment he saw me, though we had never met. He told me he had other children, legitimate ones, from his marriage. He told me he had made his peace with God, and that he wished to make his peace with his conscience. That he had denied me the inheritance that was rightfully mine so as not to cause a scandal. That he would understand if I did not forgive him, I told him what I told him. That you let him go, said Lucy softly. Yes. Before he died, he amended his will. He left me a portion of the estate and the assets belonging to the son he had never publicly acknowledged. The will was sealed under the condition that it could not be executed until I was married. Lucy looked at him. Is that why you married me? Stephen looked at her directly. No, he said. I married you because I wished to. The will changed. Nothing of what I felt, but it does change what we have. And I wanted you to know before someone else told you. Lucy said nothing for a long moment. She processed the words. She ordered them inside her. She looked for the trap, the lie, the calculation that might lie beneath. She found none of those things. She found only the story of a man who had lived with a secret too long and had finally let it go. How much? She asked at last, with the practicality of someone who needs to understand the concrete before she can understand anything else. Mr. Leonard cleared his throat slightly. The Oakvale estate includes land, a dwelling and livestock, he said. It is a considerable property. How much? Repeated Lucy. Mr. Leonard gave her a figure. Lucy went very still. Stephen was watching her. Are you all right? He asked. Yes, she said, and her voice was steady, though everything else inside her was spinning. I am all right. Mr. Leonard explained the steps to be taken, a formal meeting with Solicitor Pryor, the presentation of the documents certifying Sir Severin Carver's paternity, the signing of the corresponding proceedings. Everything was already prepared. Only Stephen's presence was needed. When Mr. Leonard had gone, Lucy and Stephen were left alone in the kitchen. Outside, the December wind moved the branches of the olive trees in the lane. Why didn't you tell me before? Asked Lucy. Because I wanted what was between us to be ours first, said Stephen. Before. Everything else arrived. Lucy looked at him for a long moment. And if I had been different, she said. If I had been one of those who change according to what they see? You are not, said Stephen, with the certainty of someone who has truly looked at a person. Lucy rose. She went to the window. From there she could see the olive lane, the old gnarled trees that in winter looked like skeletons, but in spring gave a shade that was a gift. And what now? She asked softly. Now we need to speak with Pryor, said Stephen. And we need to tell your family, and we need to speak with Merritt. Lucy turned round. With Aubrey? With Aubrey. In his eyes there was something that was not a threat, but was resolve. The resolve of a man who has waited long enough and knows the moment has come. The meeting with Mr. Fulton Pryor was 3 days later. Pryor was a man who had spent 30 years keeping the secrets of Ashford and the surrounding villages, and who had learned to show the same. Face before fortune as before ruin. When Stephen and Lucy entered his office, he received them with his usual courtesy. When he took out the documents, he began to explain with the meticulous precision of one who has gone over the papers many times. Sir Severin Carver had been, during the last years of his life, the owner of the Oakvale estate, a property of considerable size in the valley of that name, 30 miles north of Ashford. The will, drafted in the last months of Severin's life, established that Stephen Carver, acknowledged natural son, would inherit 1/3 of the estate plus the movable property and the funds deposited at the regional bank, under the condition that he be married at the time of execution. The condition had been met. Mr. Pryor held his spectacles and looked at Lucy. "Congratulations, madam," he said, with a seriousness that was not cold but simply precise. Lucy nodded. They came out of the solicitor's office under a December sky that threatened rain, but had not yet delivered it. They stopped in the street for a moment, the two of them, without speaking. The village was around them, the square with the centuries-old fig tree, the market with the stalls closed at that hour, the whitewashed houses with the windows lit. "How do you feel?" asked Stephen. Lucy thought about the question. She looked for it inside herself. "Different," she said at last. "Not in the way I expected." How did you expect to feel? I don't know. Relief, perhaps, or triumph. But it is not that. What is it then? Lucy looked at him. Gratitude, she said, for what we have built without knowing any of this. Stephen looked at her for a moment, and then, for the first time since they had known each other, it was he who put his hand on hers. Not a small gesture in a man who guarded so much. It was the certainty that carries the weight of everything it has cost to reach that point. That afternoon they went to the Hartwell estate. Lord Roger received them on the porch. When Stephen explained the situation with the same brevity and clarity with which he did all things, Roger was silent for a time. Then he cleared his throat. Then he looked at Stephen in a way that was the first time he had truly looked at him, without the condescension, the injured pride, or the resignation that had colored all previous looks. I should have treated you differently, he said at last. You had no reason to, said Stephen. Nor would it have been an excuse had I known, said Roger, with a clumsy honesty that cost him but came out. Lucy looked at her father. It had been a long time since she had seen him like this, truly small, without the refuge of position or pride, simply a man acknowledging he had erred. She put her hand on his arm. Father, she said, it is over now. Lady Catherine was in the kitchen. When Roger called her in and explained what had happened, she listened with that outward calm that was her way of absorbing great shocks. When Roger finished, Catherine looked at Lucy for a long moment, and then she said, You always knew what you were doing. It was not an apology, but it was the closest Lady Catherine could come to one. You were lucky, her mother added. Yes, said Lucy, but I also chose well. Catherine looked at her, and she nodded very slightly, with the stiffness of a woman who does not bend easily, but who knows when reality has won. The news spread through Ashford at the usual speed. But this time it was different. It was not the gossip of someone who takes pleasure in another's misfortune, but the kind of news that forces people to take stock of themselves. Stephen Carver, the carpenter, was the acknowledged heir of Sir Severin Carver. The woman they had seen as a fool and a simpleton had chosen better than any of them. Hope Fenton was the first to change her tone. At Thursday's market she approached Lucy with that manner certain people have of presenting repentance as though it were a courtesy. "Oh, Lucy, how delightful for you," she said, with a smile that did not reach the eyes but tried to. "I always said that husband of yours had something special about him." Lucy looked at her. For a long, serene moment, which Hope correctly interpreted for what it was, the calm of someone who no longer needs anything from this person. "Good morning, Hope," said Lucy, and kept walking. And it was that simple, unembellished reply that gave Lucy the exact measure of how much she had changed. The meeting with Lord Aubrey remained. It took place a week later at Merritt's own estate. It was Stephen who requested the appointment. He did not go alone. He went with Mr. Leonard and with Mr. Fulton Prior, because when power is at stake, the law and documents do better work than words. Lucy did not go. Stephen had suggested it. She said it was not necessary. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Then stay." And she stayed. The meeting lasted an hour. Stephen did not recount the details when he returned, but the results were clear. The papers Merritt had presented against the Hartwell estate had legal defects that Mr. Prior had identified with surgical precision. The old debts, even had they existed, were time-barred. And Stephen's new position made of him a person before whom Aubrey Merritt could no longer simply exert the pressure of those who have more. It was not a spectacular defeat. It was something more like the moment when a flame that has been burning for a long time goes out, discreetly, without drama, leaving only the smell of smoke. Lord Aubrey Merritt did not appear in the village for weeks. When he returned, it was plain that something had changed in him, not in his position, not in his money, but in that air of invincibility he had. He had come to know the limit of his power, and that knowledge had reduced him to his true size. When Lucy saw him in the square for the first time, after everything, she felt no triumph. She felt something stranger and cleaner: indifference. The kind of indifference that does not come from resentment but from distance, from having crossed enough ground that what was left behind can no longer reach you. Aubrey looked at her. She looked at him. And then each continued on their way. The Oakvale estate was large and needed work. Stephen and Lucy went to see it for the first time on a Saturday in December, on a morning that had the clean cold of a southern winter, the kind that cuts but does not hurt. The estate was 30 miles away, along a dirt road that in summer would be dust and in winter mud, but which that day was firm and dry under the wheels of the hired carriage. The fields surrounding the property were a peaceful brown, resting after the harvest, waiting for spring. The main house was of stone, large and somewhat neglected, with a 3-story facade and an inner courtyard with a fountain that no longer ran. There were other buildings: the hayloft, the stables, the mill that no longer milled. Everything needed hands, attention, work. Lucy walked through the rooms in silence, looking at the ceilings, the windows, the floors. Stephen followed her. Every now and then she stopped, and he stopped. There was something in the way she looked at everything that was different from the way she had walked through his little house in the olive lane for the first time. Then it had been an inventory of what was lacking. Now it was something more like imagining what could be. They came out into the courtyard. The dry fountain had moss on the stone edges. The courtyard's olive trees were old and gnarled and very beautiful. "What do you think?" asked Stephen. "That it has a lot of work," said Lucy. "Yes, and that it is worth doing." Stephen looked at her. "Would you do it with me?" he asked. It was not a question about the estate. Lucy looked at him. "With you," she said. "From the beginning." Stephen nodded, and something in his face opened, slightly, like a window thrown open after being shut too long, letting in air and light with the naturalness of what should always have been that way. It was in that courtyard, among the old olive trees and the dry fountain and the clean December cold, that they took each other's hands truly. Not as the nighttime gesture of hand on hand, but fully, fingers interlaced, in that language that needs no words. And there they stayed for a while, looking at the estate, looking at the fields, looking at what they had and what they could do with it. It was not an ending. It was the beginning of something. The following spring, the Oakvale estate was beginning to wake. The laborers Stephen had hired were working the fields. The courtyard fountain flowed again, thanks to the repair Stephen had made with his own hands. The stone facade had been consolidated, the roofs repaired, the stables clean and with new horses. Lucy managed the estate with the same quiet efficiency with which she had managed the workshop. Notebook, but on a different scale. She learned slowly, without rushing, asking when she did not know, and applying what she learned. Stephen did the same. He built what needed to be built, repaired what needed to be repaired, without letting his new position change the way he was in the world. Lord Roger and Lady Catherine came to visit in April. It was a visit that had cost more than one adjustment of pride and expectations, but which finally happened. Roger walked through the fields with Stephen and talked of crops and grain prices, and it was visible to everyone that something between the two of them had loosened, that knot that had been tight from the start. Catherine went with Lucy through the house. They stopped in the main bedroom, which had windows onto the courtyard and a view of the olive trees that was beautiful even on grey mornings. "You have a good hand for this," said Catherine, looking at how Lucy had arranged the room. "I learned it in the olive lane," said Lucy. Her mother looked at her. "Were you happy there?" she asked, with a question that had many other questions inside it. "Yes," said Lucy, "I was happy there." Catherine nodded. "Good," she said. And it was enough. Agnes and Rose also came on a later visit when summer was already warming the fields and the days were long and generous. The two younger sisters ran through the courtyard and leaned over the fountain and walked through the fields with the freedom of the young who do not need to. understand everything to enjoy what is in front of them. Rose found a kitten in the hayloft and spent the afternoon trying to persuade Lucy she could keep it. "It is not me you need to persuade," said Lucy. "Persuade your brother-in-law." Rose went to find Stephen with the kitten in her arms and a negotiator's face. Stephen looked at the animal, then at the girl, and nodded. "Let it stay," he said. Rose ran off with the kitten pressed to her chest, and Lucy watched from the doorway as Stephen looked after her with something in his face that had never been there before. Lightness. The beginning of something that was joy. Ashford, at the distance of 30 miles and the time elapsed, was now a different place in Lucy's memory. It was no longer the village that had judged her and laughed. It was the place where she had made the most important decision of her life. It was the place where she had learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but moving in spite of it. It was the place where she had met a man made of silence and wood, and a firmness that was the closest thing to loyalty she had ever seen. The day they returned to Ashford together, several months after everything had happened, was an ordinary Tuesday market day. Stephen needed to see a timber supplier, and Lucy wanted to call in at her parents' estate. They walked through the square. The centuries-old fig tree was still in its place, as always, unaware of everything that had happened under its branches. Violet's stall was in its spot. Mr. Pryor's office had the blind half lowered because Mr. Fulton took his afternoon nap at that hour. Hope Fenton saw them from the doorway of her house. She watched them pass, and Lucy, who saw her watching, smiled at her. Not the smile of triumph, which is ugly, but the smile of someone who no longer needs anything from anyone, which is the freest smile of all. Stephen walked beside her in that way of his that had not changed, unhurried, without vanity, with the hands, that were still a carpenter's hands, even if they now wore a different ring on the finger. He was still the same man who had driven posts in the neighbor's yard on a misty morning, and she was still the same woman who had gathered eggs and looked at him with different eyes. But they were at the same time completely different, not because fortune had changed them, but because they had had the time and the space to truly look at each other, without the noise of what the world expected of them. They had built something in the small that held in the large, that respect born of having seen the other in unadorned moments, when soap was scarce, and the cold pressed hard, and the debts pressed harder, and the neighbors judged. That was the secret Stephen had guarded, not the will, not the estate, not his father's name. The true secret was simpler and harder to explain. He was a man who knew who he was, even when no one recognized him, who did what needed doing, even when no one saw him, who loved with the same silent determination with which he made his furniture, finding the form that already existed inside the wood and letting it out. And Lucy, who had chosen in the darkness knowing none of this, had chosen well. Not through luck. Through that intuition that people have who learn to look beyond appearances, who know how to recognize the quality of a man not by what he announces about himself, but by what he does when no one is watching. The fig tree in the square gave shade that, morning as always, children played among its roots. The smell of bread from the bakery drifted from the street opposite, and Lucy Hartwell, who was now Lucy Carver, though in her heart she would always be both things at once, walked through the square of Ashford with her hand laced in her husband's, and knew that nothing she had left behind was worth what she had now. Life was not perfect. It never is. There would be difficult days ahead, as there had been behind. There would be complicated decisions and poor seasons and moments when weariness would weigh more than hope. But what they had was real, built of the stuff of daily life, of honest silences and hands that reach for each other in the dark and hot water set out every morning without anyone asking. And that, as Lucy had learned in the olive lane, lasts longer than all the rest.